healthcare is arguably one of the most controversial issues that the candidates are arguing over this election cycle. But this isn't necessarily unique from the past few elections. But here's what is new. More voters than ever are standing up and demanding single-payer Medicare for all. Here to talk about why she believes that system is the only one that is just inhumane is Michelle DuBarry. Michelle, thanks for joining us today. Michelle is a writer, a mom, an activist who lives with her husband and 2 young children in Portland, my old hometown. She is a grant writer for Portland Community College and also serves as the vice president of communications for the Faculty and Academic Professionals Union. Yay, we love unions. Since losing her toddler son in a car crash involving a careless driver in 2010, she has been an advocate for insurance reform and safe streets and has written numerous essays exploring grief and loss. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, Modern Loss, The Oregonian, and Literary Mama. Michelle, thanks for joining us on the program.
Thank you for inviting me.
So can you tell me, and I'm sorry if, can you tell me a little bit about what happened in 2010?
Sure.
And I'm sorry to make you relive I guess you have to do this all the time.
Yeah, I'm pretty used to it at this point. So in 2010, my husband was pushing my son in a stroller through a crosswalk near our home in Portland. And a careless driver who was turning right through the intersection basically stepped on the wrong pedal and he hit the accelerator instead of the brake. So he struck my husband, my son, and another man who was in the crosswalk. My husband was injured, but ultimately was okay. Our son was rushed to the hospital in an ambulance. He endured 2 surgeries, spent a night in the intensive care unit, and the next day he died.
I'm so sorry.
Thank you.
That's like horrible, the worst possible thing. Can you talk about what happened subsequent to that and how you became an advocate for Medicare for all?
Sure. I mean, I like, it's always been an issue I've been interested in and supported. I think I probably wrote in my college newspaper about it. So going through this wasn't the thing that made me support Medicare for all, but it just like really intensely clarified how badly it's needed.
Tell people what happened to you in terms of the billing.
Well, so I think one of the things that's just uniquely American is sitting in a hospital and worrying about money. So I'll just paint you a picture here, which is, my son, he's basically on life support. He's attached to a ventilator. There's beeping machines all around me. My husband is sitting next to me in a chair. He's wrapped in bloody bandages. He's kind of slumped over sleeping. It's like 2 a.m. and I'm sitting there going, oh my God, like, what are my deductibles? I can't remember. Like, what is FMLA? Like, am I going to be able to take time off work? We knew by that point that if my son was going to survive, he would likely have profound disabilities and it would be a long hospital stay. And so all of this uncertainty swirling around, adding into that mix, how are we going to pay for that? Adding into that mix, how am I going to keep my job? Because without my job, we don't have insurance, and my son's insurance was through my job. And just trying to figure out like the patchwork of things that we think of as a safety net. It's not really practical when you have a catastrophic event like that. So
it is unthinkable that in that moment you had to be concerned about what the government's FMLA policy is.
Right. Yeah.
Unthinkable.
And the only way I even knew about it was because I had taken maternity leave. And so I knew, like, I sort of knew I could have 12 weeks off, but that it was unpaid, but we could probably figure that out. And, but I mean, beyond the 12 weeks, there's nothing, but it turned out that I hadn't even been at my job for a year. And one of the things you need to qualify for FMLA is you have to be at your job for a year. And so it's it's a terror, like it's terrifying. Everything is terrifying about that situation. But when you talk about adding on a new layer of stress for families, and there are families like going through that right now all across the country, I'm sure.
A quote from a piece that you wrote about this situation is, within a week of your son's death, before we even had received a bill, the hospital put a lien on your house to make sure you wouldn't skip out on the bill.
So that I have to correct that actually.
Oh,
So that was on my Twitter thread that went viral.
oh,
And I got a lot of questions about it. So I went back to like some emails from that time. So the hospital did take out a lien against us. It wasn't against our house. The hospital put a lien on any settlement we might receive from the
either
accident.
way.
Right. Yeah, I know. I kind of feel bad. I didn't expect, obviously I didn't expect my Twitter thread to go viral. And so the internet fact checkers kind of came after me, but I did correct it. And it's still, I think the point stands. It's kind of a minor technicality. Like,
Absolutely. I agree completely. So you got a settlement from the at-fault driver. Like, that
well,
helps when your son is dead.
not really. I mean, yeah, I mean, it is like, it's expensive, to lose somebody you love, to have your world exploded like that. My husband had injuries that were minor, but he needed care and follow up. We both had PTSD, and I'm a grant writer, and I don't know how, like, thinking about going back to work, even like a week later or 2 weeks later, like I just, I couldn't,
That's
I could
insane
barely,
that you
yeah,
would have to think about going back to work a week
right.
later after losing your son.
And yeah, and it was we needed time, and we just needed a little space
Yeah,
to,
you should have a year off. I mean, I
yeah,
used to work as a therapist. They say the first year is all deep grief. It's not
yeah,
like 2 weeks later you're fine and let's just move on with capitalism, you know?
right, right.
Oh my
Yeah.
God.
And so, it's just, it's expensive. And so I think that's why the auto insurance settlement was comforting in the beginning. Like I learned about it, and I felt like, okay, we have, like, I can take some time off. I can, I can pay for plane tickets for my family to come be with me and attend the memorial service. I can, um, go to therapy. Like, we can pay for my husband's medical care and all of our out-of-pocket expenses. Because another thing, if you look at your insurance, there's the deductible, but then there's a thing called the out-of-pocket maximum. And so back then in 2010, our out-of-pocket maximum was $4,500. So when I was looking at my insurance, I was like, okay, the most we're going to have to pay for this 27-hour hospital stay, probably $4,500. Um,
Let me
so
guess. It turns out you were wrong.
yeah, I mean,
How did that happen?
it ended up being closer to 5,000. I mean, one of the things is, like, your insurance company gets the bill, the hospital, the itemized sort of like bill from the hospital, and they just kind of comb through it, and they're like, okay, we'll pay for this, we're not going to pay for that, pay for that. So it didn't turn out to be a lot of money, but if they don't want to cover it, they just don't, and they can give you a reason. And you're a grieving person or someone who's sick or injured, putting that responsibility on them to, like, fight back on on hospital billing is just crazy.
So
Um,
you had a you got a pain and suffering settlement, and then the
right.
hospital demanded reimbursement for $170,000.
So the our
Excuse
health
me.
insurance, company paid about $175,000 for my son's care, and we were supposed to get a pain and suffering settlement. And so we were shocked to learn that our health insurance company was actually first in line to collect the pain and suffering settlement, because
Why? They
in the
didn't go through
yeah,
pain and suffering. I'm
well,
sorry.
they were out because of this careless driver. They were out $175,000, and so the
That's
law,
what have you not been paying premiums? I mean, you've been paying premiums this whole time.
yeah,
Your job has been paying premiums. That's what insurance is for.
yeah, it makes,
Oh, I'm mad on your behalf.
thank you. Yeah, I'm still mad. It's legal in about half of states, and most people don't know until they think they're getting a settlement and they find out that they're not. So it's 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 just, I mean, it's
It's
awful.
barbaric, I believe, is the word that the people in our chat are using.
Yeah.
You're a supporter of Medicare for all. Can you talk about why a single payer healthcare system is so important?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not an expert. But
You are kind of.
yeah, I mean, I guess anyone
I
who's
mean, you're.
cancer,
This is. This is so. It's so important, and I'm so glad that you're sharing your story with us, because people when experts talk, they talk about co-payments and deductibles, and Bernie Sanders will say a person should not have to pay XYZ if this happens, but you are the person, and our hearts are all going out to you, of course, for your loss, and also the attendant abuse that the system heaped upon that loss. So what you're doing is very important, and I appreciate it, and your perspective is incredibly important. So I'm going to ask you the question again, and I'm
okay.
sorry to push back on you for not being an expert. You have a certain kind of expertise that I think is very
Yeah.
important. Um,
Um, so first of all, tying your health insurance to your employment is absurd. If you were going to design a system from scratch, no one would ever do that, because when you are sick or injured and you can't go to work, you lose your insurance. So that's
yeah, that
crazy.
seems ridiculous.
Yeah. And that makes every single person who has insurance through their employer vulnerable. So that's one thing. And another reason I think to support Medicare for all is so that people don't have to go through the mental gymnastics of figuring out whether or not they can pay for healthcare for their family, for themselves. People should just be able to go to the doctor. People should be able to get healthcare. We pay so much money, and I think for like my health insurance costs for 2019, and when you add up insurance, deductibles, copays for a relatively uneventful year, we paid about $25,000 for a family of four.
Wow.
Um, and so insurance companies are relentless when it comes to trying to figure out how not to pay for stuff. So everything is a struggle. Like my mammogram, I had to fight to get them to cover it, because they said that because my sister was diagnosed with breast cancer and she's okay, but that they coded it differently. And so they charged me for my mammogram, which under the Affordable Care Act is supposed to be covered as preventive care. But they
Wow. They say because your sister had breast cancer, you have a pre-existing condition that you have a
something like that.
familial. Wow.
It was coding. And so, that's just one example. Like every
My gosh, my old Italian grandmother's advice is coming back in my head. Don't tell anybody anything.
totally, yeah. But like, do you want to go to your doctor and have to like be
Yeah,
careful what you
lie
say?
about
'Cause they
your
might
family history.
code it
No.
differently and you might get a bill. So, I mean, I can tell you, it's boring to talk about, but like a lot of examples like that of just like having to spend time on the phone with your insurance company, like paying for something you thought was covered and now you have to fight for it. Like it should be simple. It should be simple.
Mhm. Mhm. Whew. We have a commenter named Old Growth Canopy saying, I'm an oncology social worker. I help people overcome barriers to treatment. Recently, my job has turned into financial counseling. Everyone, even folks with good insurance, will end up with a significant financial hardship in America due to cancer. Even standard Medicare only pays 80%, which means standard 3-day hospital visit for a 66-year-old would cost $4,000 to $5,000. Base copays add up quickly. Michelle, you have spent much of your time fighting for this just healthcare system, and you say that you believe a change is coming. Can you talk about what makes you so optimistic?
Well, it seems like there's grassroots energy behind Medicare for All. We have a presidential candidate who whose signature issue is single payer healthcare. And I mean, I think I never thought I would see that day, and it's incredibly exciting. And there's also a lot of people that are talking about their own personal stories and sharing their stories, and I'm just one of many. And I think it's incredibly powerful, and it's building a community, and it's building political momentum that I'm really hopeful that we can actually make it happen.
In 2019, you initiated and passed a made whole statute in Oregon. I used to live in Portland, which prevents health insurance companies from collecting pain and suffering awards from victims of automobile crashes. Can you talk about what it was like to get that legislation passed?
Sure. I I
And good
started
for
talk-
you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm really proud of it. I started talking to my legislators in 2011 about what happened to my family. And so it took me that long to sort of figure out how to navigate the political world in Salem, which is Oregon's capital. And in 2019, it was just kind of a perfect storm. We had a Democratic supermajority in both the House and the Senate, Democratic governor, and I had just kind of figured out how to be a lobbyist for my own personal issue. And so I had some time, and I went around and talked to legislators, and my bill ended up passing almost unanimously, but it was never a sure thing because the health insurance lobbyists were working behind the scenes. They never came to a committee hearing. They never testified. They didn't come out publicly against my bill, but they were trying to kill it in the shadows the whole time. And so it was never a sure thing until it passed, and then so it passed, like I said, nearly unanimously, and became law in January of this year.
Mhm. What should our viewers know about the fight for a just healthcare system? And what do you think supporters of Medicare for All should be doing to make it a reality?
I think supporters of Medicare for All should be donating to Bernie Sanders and volunteering for Bernie Sanders and talking to your friends and family about Bernie Sanders and joining that movement.
If Bernie Sanders does not become the candidate, do you think that the other candidates will be um, influenceable or pushable so that they will go as close to Medicare for All as possible?
I mean, I hope so. I think if Bernie Sanders doesn't win the nomination, the movement goes on. We have to. I mean, it's an emergency for millions of people, and so I think my experience is that legislators they actually do listen sometimes, and so they're responsive when people are energized.
I'm going to give everyone, and I'm putting it right now in our chat. I will put it in our chat, your Twitter handle. So please follow Michelle's work at DuBarry Pie. It's at DuBarryPie. Great handle.
No, thanks.
At DuBarry Pie. DuBarry's your last name. Michelle, thank you for joining us. Would you mind fielding a question that has to do with our medical system? I'd love to hear your thoughts about it.
Sure.
So Lauren from Australia, who has been typing into the chat as we've been talking, saying how horrible it is. In Australia, they have healthcare for everyone. And so these concerns are not front of the mind when something happens. Her quote is, "I've been wondering just how unprepared the US is for a possible coronavirus outbreak due to the lack of free universal healthcare. I've heard people getting charged for forced quarantines, charged for coronavirus testing, etc. When you combine that with the lack of support for sick days, the amount of people living paycheck to paycheck, the virus could spread like wildfire." No pun intended from Lauren, because she's in Australia, because those infected won't afford getting proper help. Your thoughts on this, Michelle?
I mean, it's a disaster. People don't go to the doctor because they're afraid. They don't know how much it's going to cost, and they probably can't afford it anyway. We don't have paid sick leave, so people are going to go to work sick. And yeah, it's a scary situation, especially for people who are already vulnerable.
Final thoughts you'd like to leave the audience with?
Um, hmm. No, I just thank you for having me on, and I would love to connect with people who are thinking about passing a made whole statute in their state. I'd be happy to sort of share my playbook with anyone who is doing similar work. So get in touch.
It's such a great idea. Thank you, and it's wonderful work. And I'm really grateful for the fact that you did the service to families who, maybe won't have to live through what you lived through, coming out of your own crisis. And again, I'm sorry about the loss of your son, and I thank you so much for coming on the program.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Michelle. Thanks.